Chapter 7. Dakota. When Ronan and Dakota walked into the great dining hall, no one said a word. All eyes moved in their direction. The endless loud chatter suddenly ceased at seeing the two hand in hand. The young werewolves serving dinner moved effortlessly between the tables, suddenly stopping in their tracks as they carried large trays with fresh, uncooked deer meat. The servers' hands weighted down with large platters of raw food for everyone, including cooked meat and vegetables for Dakota. Ronan took Dakota's hand, and she followed behind him as she glanced around the room with its high ceiling filled with wood beams stretching endlessly across. The room with wooden benches, many of them unoccupied, gave it a cold feeling. The table reserved for the alpha, along with 2 seats facing the pack. Ronan took his place and waved his arm for Dakota to sit. She glanced nervously around and sat as he requested. After realizing Ronan's importance, she became more relaxed. Then a tall, young, handsome werewolf with 3 females sitting at the right of him and 3 sitting at his left rose and said, "Why do you have that human here? We can still smell the stench of a vampire on her." The pack of mostly females and 6 males mumble something garbled. Dakota didn't understand. She thought it was another language. A language only werewolves understood, and perhaps it was because Ronan knew well it was in defiance of what he chooses to do. They could only talk because it was against their rules to depose the alpha. Ronan had received his alpha status because he was born of an alpha, and his father had handed over the power to Ronan and not his brothers. The only way they could depose him was to challenge him physically, and from their body language, none would attempt the feat, at least not now, because none were as tall and imposing as Ronan. Ronan rose from his seat near Dakota, his brow furrowed, and his piercing brown eyes narrowed under a hooded expression. He turned to meet the eyes of the werewolf who spoke. The werewolf lowered his eyes, almost kneeling. "You challenge me as an alpha of this pack?" Ronan barked out an angry response. "If I wish to have a human present, it's because I have a reason. And it's not up to you as a single werewolf to challenge my authority. Only the council can do that." The young werewolf sat. Dakota saw the resemblance. "Who was that?" she whispered. Ronan leaned into her and whispered. "That was my brother throwing his weight around. Brothers are like that. My older brother, of course. My father passed over him and named me as the pack leader. He has been pissed ever since. He doesn't become the pack leader until after I die, or relinquish my duties to the pack. Bringing you here is important to my pack." "Eat," Ronan said, raising his hands to the servers. Still standing and ready to answer him, Ronan said, "I am the council and I say she stays. If there's a challenge, tell me now." Heads began to lower, and when Ronan sat, Dakota started cutting into her cooked meat as the females and males watched for a few minutes. Then, as a silent protest of a human being in their dining hall, they raised a large piece of bloody meat, growled, and tore into its flesh, peering at Dakota, signaling they could tear her apart. In succession, each werewolf lowered their heads and raised their eyes, growling and eating. Dakota didn't pay them any attention. She felt that Ronan would control them, and after what she had been through, it would take more than intimidation by a few werewolves to scare her. "After dinner, take a walk with me," Ronan said. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation. "I would be happy to walk with you." Anything for Dakota to leave those combative werewolves. They hated her, and her presence inside their compound during this time. It was a special time for them, and she had just invaded their sacred place. A time when the females would mate, and there were many hoping to mate with Ronan, and there she was walking with him hand in hand in their house. The home built by werewolves and for werewolves. A human hadn't graced their halls since Ronan's father brought his mother and introduced her to the pack, and no doubt she had been greeted with the same unfriendly behavior. But these were different times, and these werewolves were unlike the ones before them. No longer open to humans, they built a closed society because of being hunted by humans to almost extinction. Even their businesses were owned by only the werewolves in their pack, and they didn't hire any humans unless they needed their expertise. When Ronan ate all that he could to satisfy his insatiable appetite, and Dakota had eaten her last potato, she wiped her mouth with the only napkin in the dining hall. Ronan rose to hand her his hand, and they strolled out together. "You know your pack doesn't want me around. Why don't you take me to Seattle, like that we both can be happy?" "I can't." Dakota stopped and glanced up at Ronan. "It's important that I'm here to oversee the mating ceremonies. If I were to leave for one day, I could be dethroned by my brother." "He would do that?" "It's a sacred ceremony that only the head alpha is in charge. The few werewolves in a pack will take 3 to 5 females each. As many as they can provide for. Alphas like myself can take 10, but that's pushing it because of the number of pups being born. The females have to know that they are protected during their pregnancy, and their pups have plenty of food once they're born. Their only protection for themselves and their young is the ceremony which will bind their mates to them." This was the first time she knew of this, and it was something different, but not that different from humans. Men live by laws. They can only have one wife at a time. "I guess I have to wait until everything is over." A smile covered her face up to her eyes. They smiled too. "Who will officiate when you declare a mate?" "Another alpha. My brother. Only alphas are allowed to formalize the union of one werewolf, and we're females. When they do mate at the full moon, the females will become pregnant. This is to make sure that the pups born to the alphas or betas are legitimate. It's against our laws to have a werewolf impregnate females before they have mated during the full moon. To do so before mating night would break our laws. The punishment is banishment from the pack. If this occurs, they will be isolated and will lose their protection the pack offers. If a werewolf remains on the island during the time of the vampire's hunt, they would certainly die without our protection. I can see why they will follow the laws." Dakota stopped walking and looked up at the sky. When Ronan looked around, he had walked the perimeter of the compound and stood miles away from his home. "We had better get back. You need your rest because tomorrow, I will take you into the woods to teach you to hunt and fish." He placed his hand behind her waist and turned her in the direction of the lights. They trod down the path past the towering trees and evergreen bushes. Every so often Dakota would stop and try to tell Ronan why she couldn't stay, and why he would waste time showing her how to hunt. She slowed her steps. "Me? I can't do any of that. I don't know anything about hunting. I can't use a gun. I hate guns and I can't kill for my food," Dakota said, her eyes gazing wide with innocence and pity. But Ronan knew what he wanted, and that was to toughen Dakota to make her presentable to his pack. The world of humans, vampires, and werewolves is hard and dangerous. It is important for your survival to be aware and comfortable with your surroundings, to survive in it. We don't use guns either. We hunt with bows and arrows and knives. And we fish with our hands. He watched Dakota raise an eyebrow at the thought of fishing with her hands. You will learn to fish with the bare minimum of things. But I'm going off to school come this fall, and I don't expect that I will meet anyone that will harm me. She knew better. The world will harm you. Those vampires will harm you. I could harm you. But I won't because. Ronan didn't say any more. Dakota turned, looking confused at Ronan. What did he mean? She blinked her eyes and walked quickly along the path. She didn't want to hunt or fish. She didn't like that kind of things. All she needed to do was get back to Seattle and get to California for sunshine and lose herself in her books and try to forget this world she knew nothing about. If she got as far away from Seattle, she would have a chance to forget Ashton. She needed to forget him because since she had met him, she had nothing but trouble. But she didn't know that soon her heartache would begin. When Ronan caught up to Dakota, he walked silently alongside her. The only reason I'm here was to find my friends. Because of the time that has passed, I'm sure they're dead. The vampires must have them by now, but I will never give up until I know for sure. even if I have to march over to Morgan's mansion and confront him." Ronan stopped and didn't move a step. He slanted his head, glancing down at her. "You know that monster?" It was a question he wanted to be answered. "Not really. I met Morgan once." "But you know that he lives in a mansion." "Don't all vampires live in mansions?" "No. Only the affluent ones," Ronan said. He curiously raised one brow, pondering Dakota's response. Dakota ambled, falling behind Ronan this time, not wanting to answer any further questions. When Ronan saw that Dakota was several feet behind, he stopped and turned. She walked past him. He stopped Dakota by extending his long arm and placing his hand firmly on her shoulder. "Dakota, if there's anything I need to know about you and that vampire, tell me now, because if my pack discovers that you are hiding something, and you have anything to do with him, they will expel me for bringing you here and kill you. Soon my brother will ask how it is I found you on our island and brought you here. It's a logical question. You weren't caught, and if it was that, they allowed you to go, and if the vampires did, it's because they have a good reason. Maybe to lead them here." Dakota's eyes widened. She knew what Ronan inferred, that she was an infiltrator. She reacted angrily. "I'm not a spy. I hate that vampire. He has my friends, and I don't know what he's done to them. I would kill him if I had the chance." She barked out her strong feelings, and Ronan could see the heated hatred in her eyes and hear the intense passion in her voice. Shaking from anger and the cool of the night, Dakota didn't know what to do. If she revealed her love relationship with Ashton, Ronan's brother, or Ronan might kill her that minute. If Dakota lied and he found out, he would let his pack kill her, but nonetheless she would be dead. She didn't know Ronan, and she didn't realize the deep passion he held for her. "There's nothing to tell." Small relief washed through Dakota at seeing Ronan turn and walk away with a satisfied glance, only turning once to see if she was coming. Dakota scooted up close behind Ronan as the darkness overtook them. When the sound of wolves howling in a distance, Dakota rushed to Ronan and grabbed his hand. He glanced down at her. The touch of her hand sent shivers to his massive cock, and he looked up at the moon. It would be soon, the moon would be full, and his desire for a female would be at its, and the were female's desire would be receptive to him. He wanted none of the were females. He could have mounted any one of them if he so chooses, but none had made his cock ache as this human. He wished it would be that way with Dakota, because a were female is vulnerable to a werewolf's yearning during the full moon. He hoped it would be that way with humans too. If it were so, then he would get his chance to mate with Dakota. The fantasy of a young werewolf flawed his thinking, and he closed his eyes to what was ahead of him. He became blind to what he had witnessed, and to the questions he had asked, and the werewolves would ask. How is it that this human survived the vampires on the island when no one has before her? Chapter 8. Dakota. Dakota opened her eyes to see Ronan standing over her as the sunlight peeked through the shutters. She sat up quickly in her bed. "You appear to be sleeping soundly. I wanted us to get an early start. But we can't always get what we wish for." Smiling at Ronan, Dakota wiped the sleep from her eyes. She concentrated, and after her eyes and mind focused, she realized she wasn't at home. She had a beautiful dream about Ashton. Dakota dreamed he was like anyone else, and they were walking in the park holding hands, and the winter sun warmed them. She had just told Ashton that she was pregnant. And then she heard Ronan's voice, and her eyes opened to see him standing over her as she slept. She wanted to sleep longer to see how her dream came out. "I can't remember when I've had this kind of rest. I feel much better." She raised her arms and watched up at Ronan. Narrowing her eyes, she asked, "Why were you in this room?" "I've been here all night sleeping at the foot of your bed." "Why would you do that?" "I didn't want anyone to harm you." "Who would harm me?" "You appear to have vampires after you, and then there are angry wer-females who see you as a threat, and my brother who wants to dethrone me for bringing you here. Just another day in the life of a werewolf, I guess." He smiled at Dakota, who seemed to take his words too seriously. "All you have to do is take me back to Seattle. You won't have me to worry about, and your problems will be over." The day Ronan met Dakota, he knew his problems had just started. There was no way he would leave her. Not now. Not since he had marked her as his. The only thing he hadn't done with her had sex and impregnate her. That will take more time, he thought. If only he had more time. "I will take you home, but in my own time. I have plans for you." Dakota pulled the covers up to her breasts. She saw the way Ronan glared at her. And the sound of his voice when he said he had plans for her. "I have my own plans. I never asked you to make plans for me." The sound of her voice was hostile and prickly. Ronan wasn't deterred. She was in his protection now, and whatever she said didn't discourage him from the life force that was more powerful than any human desires. He needed a mate, and he had chosen her, and no one turns down an alpha. The only thing that mattered now was his world and her in it. He had the power, and she was only a female. She couldn't protect herself, not from him. He was the mighty protector of all the animals that walked the earth, including humans. "Get up. I have things to teach you. It's for your survival." "But aren't you here and don't you sleep at the foot of my bed like a guard dog?" Ronan's thick brows met in the center. It angered Ronan being referred to as a dog, and Dakota knew it, and that's why she chose those words. She thought if she made him angry enough, he would give up and take her home. "I'm not ready to get up yet," she said. Her voice gruff and frustrated. She had found her voice around Ronan, and she wanted to let him know that she wasn't happy. Ronan reached into the bed, and with one swoop he had Dakota in his arms. She glanced up at him. She saw him for the first time. He was indeed handsome with his sturdy, confident profile, and the way he held his head, regal. His features, although strong, held softened pleasure from his eyes to his mouth. Ronan's powerful arms solid, but his touch warm and gentle. Her heart thumped loudly, and her breathing intensified. Dakota's anger at Ashton had softened her heart for Ronan. He saved her from the vampires. He had been the one to defy his family and pack, and he didn't back down when confronted by the werewolves. Holding Dakota in his arms made his cock twitch and quiver with excitement. This was the sign that he had been looking for. He had many encounters with wer-females looking to interest him, and he had remained cold toward them. Even during the full moon when he should have had a hard receptive cock, and the wer-females had walked around naked, that couldn't bring his manhood to life. But just the look in her eyes and the warmth of her body stirred him to heights he had never experienced before. Perhaps it's because he was falling in love. But it wouldn't be anything to him if she didn't feel the same way. They glanced at each other in a warm, caring way. He leaned into Dakota, and his long tongue brushed against her soft lower lip. She opened her mouth, and he placed his lips on hers, and his tongue entered her mouth gradually. He kissed her as she placed her arms around his neck, turning in his arms to face him, giving him a heated kiss hotter than he could imagine. She became the aggressor. Her needy mouth sucked his long tongue with passion rising in her and clouding her brain. When Dakota kissed Ronan the werewolf, Ashton the vampire shook in his sleep as if someone had plunged a stake into his heart. Dakota stopped and dropped her arms. She felt it too. She felt what Ashton felt. "Put me down. Let me stand on my feet." The break in the warmth was jarring to Ronan, and he didn't understand what to make of her heated passion one minute and the icy words coming the next. Ronan placed her feet on the floor and stood back. "Get dressed, we are leaving in 10 minutes. I need to eat." "You will eat what you catch," Ronan said, meeting Dakota's coolness with his own. Once again she found herself in the forest, and this time with a werewolf who sometimes adored her and sometimes disliked her. Dakota had the same conflicted feelings for him. But today he had a cold aloofness that showed on his face and filled every word when he spoke to her. She decided she would meet him with the same indifference. I don't want to be out here in this jungle. Why did you save me if only to make me suffer? She said, tromping through the large grasses and tall trees. Where are we anyway? Look around, that's for you to tell me, Ronan said, and continued walking along an unused grassy path. Then he headed off the trail, and Dakota stood in one place, not knowing where he had gone to. She didn't move until he showed up. Were you going to stand there all day, until a small animal drug you off and made you his breakfast? A light smirk could be seen on Ronan's mouth, and his eyes were filled with mischief. Dakota thought he enjoyed seeing her afraid. But she would try to hide that, especially if he appeared to like it. You would let that happen? I thought you would protect me? Ronan walked away from Dakota, expecting her to follow him this time. In fear of what could happen to her. She waited, and when he didn't return, she followed the path he had taken. By the broken leaves of the grass, she found him standing near a tree waiting for her. After walking for hours, she said, I need to stop and rest. Do you think a bear or wolf will stop if they're tracking you? Do you think a vampire will stop when you're tired? That's why they are called predators. They hunt, and they never stop until they get their prey. You are prey because you don't know how to protect yourself. A young wolf can take you down. Why would a werewolf hunt me? They're half human and they don't eat humans. You weren't listening. Pay attention. I said wolf like a dog, only fiercer and not domesticated. They will eat anything that moves when they're hungry. I'm hungry, Dakota whined. Here's a knife and here's a bow and arrow, now hunt. You're a predator. I don't know how to use a bow and arrow. My father paid for lessons, but I can't remember anything. Ronan stood near and demonstrated how to use the bow and arrow. He handed it to her and said, Now go, it will come back to you. But I can't eat what I hunt. I can't eat a poor squirrel or rabbit or bird. Then you will starve. And he trod through the bushes, and Dakota picked up the knife in its sheath and tucked it in her pocket. She flung the bow over her shoulder. When she caught up with Ronan, he was sitting eating a small skinned animal. I can't eat that? She grimaced. It's not for you. Haven't you heard what I said? You catch your own food. But I don't know how. Use the bow and arrow to bring it down, and then use the knife to skin it, since you don't have teeth like mine. But I'm hungry. Don't you have a fish I can eat? Ronan pointed north. There should be a river over in the far corner. Listen for its sound. Go catch your own fish, and after you eat them, I'll teach you to use the bow. You need to learn how to shoot and the strength you will need. If you paid attention and looked at the arrowheads, you would know they are silver. He turned to Dakota, watching her earnest gaze. Dakota knew what they were for. He was preparing her to kill vampires. She didn't want to kill anything. It was just something she said to Elliot and Thomas, just to give comfort and make her seem fiercer and convince herself that she could do this. Some of her best friends were probably vampires by now, and she didn't want to have to kill them. She'd sooner forget them and go back to Seattle, and then get the hell out of Washington State and go to California. She thought with all the sunshine, there wouldn't be any vampires or the likelihood of meeting any, especially since she would give up any work that required her to do night duty. And then Ashton crossed her mind. She loved him with all her heart, and to forget him would take more than another state or the handsome werewolf standing before her. What do you want me to do with this bow? Here, take it. She threw it at Ronan and ran off with the knife in her hand, headed for the waterfall. After running and treading through the thick grass, she didn't hear the water. She sat down hungry and tired and ready to give up, and standing in front of her was Ronan with fish from the stream. You are the most infuriating female I've ever known. He dropped the clean fish in front of her, sitting on a large boulder. She smelled them. These are good. I never liked fish before, but I'm beginning to acquire a taste for them. She cut a piece and ate a small portion. Like me. Am I an acquired taste too? Ronan said with a raised eyebrow. What kind of human do you like? Can I take his place? I don't know. I mean, I've only had but one boyfriend in my life. I think he has forgotten about me, and he... She stopped mid-sentence. She almost confessed to Ronan. He had a way of asking her a question, and she felt comfortable to tell him things. But things like losing her virginity to a vampire wouldn't be something she should confess to a werewolf. Did you mate with him? That's private. She turned away from Ronan. You did. I can smell you. But I don't mind. I've never really wanted to claim a female until now. I've never been enthralled with one like I am now with you. The sound of Ronan's voice echoed his fiery passion for Dakota. Why? Her head slanted, questioning his answer. But I can't be with you. We are too different. I could never live out here. You must find a female that you can share your life with. Dakota smiled, expecting a different answer than the one he was about to give. I've found a human female who I want to share everything with. Especially my life. Suddenly Dakota realized that Ronan wouldn't be discouraged from pursuing her. She dropped the half-chewed fish from her mouth. You can't mean... She shook her head. He stared, his golden eyes shining in the twilight of the half-disappearing sun. I mean to keep pursuing you until I die. I want no other females in my life.